thoughts or sort of acts, and what is his overall approach to life. Now, I'm not really sure I want to get into too much into the specific questions within the dialogue at the expense of losing sight of that. So I want to make sure that you don't lose sight of what is at stake here. This is going from Pierre Hadot's book of What is Ancient Philosophy and trying to understand what he calls the figure of Socrates. And the figure of Socrates that he strongly believes is not a sort of person of knowledge, not like a teacher, not a kind of Socratic method kind of abstract philosopher, but it's a particular way of existing, particular way of being, a way of life. And that fundamentally revolves around the issue of question. How do you pose your questions? Why do you pose your questions? And how does question function? And the example of this is in Euthyphro, and again, we can discuss as much as you like in terms of what he says about piety, how do you exist, etc. I would be more than happy to do that. But the reason that we are reading this protocol is to concentrate on how Socrates questions. How does he exist in this questioning manner? And right at the beginning, I tried to formulate this in terms of the relationship to power, because this is for me the most important thing that can appeal to us in the 21st century, how he relates to power, how does he relate to himself in terms of power, etc. So just a couple of themes just to start out the discussion. Now, he was told, as it is said in the book of Hadot too, he was told to be the wisest person by the Oracle of Delphi, who is the god of Apollo, who Heraclitus told us doesn't really show or hide, but gives a sign. So to tell something like Socrates, you are the wisest, I mean, Socrates is the wisest person, it's not like a pronouncement, it's not a statement, it is not like the way, I mean, if we go with Heraclitus, it is a sign, it shows, it is a sort of revelation. Now, Socrates responds to this. And really what that response is what makes it, as we have seen in the case of Oedipus, a tragic, namely the same oracle, the same sort of Apollo origin statement about Oedipus is going to kill his father and marry his mother is, as it is tragic, as he tries to avoid it, Socrates is also, in a sense, trying to avoid this oracle, in a sense, like he said, like, I'm trying to prove this wrong. Like, I don't believe that I'm the wisest person. Therefore, I am like questioning and trying to learn from everybody. Of course, there's a touch of irony there, etc. But then what happens to him? He dies too, like he is killed, he is murdered too. So what does it mean in terms of being the wisest person on earth and responding to that pronouncement from God in a sort of like, why don't you just go home and accept it and say like, hey, I was told that I was the wisest man in the world, so pay me some money and make me like a guru or something. Like, why can't I form a religion and follow people, the Socratism type of thing? What he does is like, oh, this is wrong, I don't think so. So I'm going to respond to it in a completely different way. So that also is one of the ways in which, following the theme of the book, that Socrates himself is tragic, because at the end of how he is, how he lives, he is being sentenced to death. Now, the immediate question of the dialogue, which I assume you read, but even if you haven't, I'm telling you that Euthyphro is prosecuting his father, and he wants to undermine his father because he thinks that his father killed somebody who is killed somebody else and then didn't know how to respond to that. Therefore, he kept him in this sort of limbo and then like imprisoned, and then he died. Therefore, Euthyphro thinks that his father is guilty, and then he takes him to court with the murder charge, believing that it is pious. Now, of course, I mean, right there is a sort of archetypal story, right? The archetypal story of Greek mythology based on the idea of killing your god, killing your father. So that was the same with Oedipus, who, like, you know the Greek mythology, right? Like the beginning of Greek mythology, the Titans, Uranus is the first sort of principle of ancient god, and then Kronos kills his father, undermines his father and becomes the head of Titans. Then Zeus kills Kronos, his father, because fathers always try to undermine their children, and then mothers kind of conspire with their younger sons and kill the father. And this is sort of a Greek thing. This is the origin of Greek mythology, which is repeated in Zeus. But if Oedipus does it, because he is mortal, that's a problem. But Euthyphro is, in a sense, symbolically doing that, trying to undermine his father by prosecuting him. So that theme is also connected to what we have been discussing in terms of tragedy and Greek mythology. So then you see how what we discussed in the pre-Socratics in this abstract way, that how philosophy moves from a theological or mythical understanding of the world in terms of gods and their interaction of gods, etc., to a more rational articulation of the world. So Euthyphro is an example of that. Euthyphro is an example of everything that we have sort of abstractly said about the pre-Socratics, like Heraclitus and Anaximander, how specifically this takes place, how this move, if it was indeed an historical move, was actually a conceptual move. Namely, how do you move from a world and a structure of meaning understood from the perspective of gods to human reason? Now, when I say structure of understanding of the world, I'm not talking about some abstract principle and some like lofty ideas, etc., but really, like, if you want to prosecute your father, if your father kills somebody, what do you do? Like, should you, like, prosecute your father if your father keeps eating his children, for example, in the case of Kronos, or if he kills somebody, like, what do you do with your father? And, the mythical perspective gives you an answer, like, look what gods are doing, but don't do what gods are doing, because then it would be hubris. So you have this dilemma, like if you are Oedipus, like, well, why is this a problem for me? And, I can kill my father because our God killed his father. But then it's hubris. As a human being, you cannot really do what gods do, and you will be punished. And that's what we also somehow always hear from the chorus at the end, as we did in Sophocles. So, like, listen to what people tell you. So Socrates then is questioning that very understanding. He's saying, like, you seem to understand, you seem to know, you seem to have a power, or both over yourself but over others, a power, a conviction that is so strong that you think not only taking your father to the court is something that you should do or you can do, but it is the right thing to do. And that's what he's questioning. That's it. That's the question of the dialogue. Now, then you can conceptually see the difficulty for us moderns, the idea of polytheism. Now, some people in the 21st century embrace polytheism, paganism, for a variety of different reasons. But what is the problem in the dialogue with respect to polytheism? Polytheism, believing in more than one God, as Greeks did.
Like, how can you be pious if the gods don't even agree?
Exactly. Well, that's one question, but also the origin of this question. So when Socrates says, so what is pious? What is piety? What does Euthyphro say?
I mean, Euthyphro basically says like that piety is, at least his initial answer, is that you will prosecute whoever it is that's committed murder or an act of sacrilege, regardless of the fact that they are your mother or your father, because it makes no difference. And
Okay.
that's not prosecute them would be impiety.
Well, that's a very good formulation, and you give a good formulation. But the initial answer seems to be even more specific, saying like prosecuting your father, that's piety. And then Socrates says, no, that's not piety. That is a pious act. But there emerges the idea of concept, not an example, which is something that we always confuse. Philosophy always, ever since Socrates today, deals with concepts, not with empirical examples. And therefore, as a philosopher, you always have a difficulty to talk to people when you ask about a concept that they give you an example. What is piety? That's here, but that's what I'm doing. It's like, that's not piety itself as a concept. That's an example of piety. I want an explanation and articulation of what piety means. And then he says, prosecuting just anybody would be a piety, or he actually gives the first philosophically acceptable but wrong answer by saying doing what is dear to God. Now, that is not an example, but that's a concept. And I hope you see the difference rather than pointing out to a particular example than giving a definition, which should cover all the pious acts. All the pious acts, to the extent that they can be said to be pious, are pleasing to God. Now, as Isaac and Kate implied, that, if something is dear to some gods and not to other gods, what do we do? What does that cause? What does that make us?
So the conclusion that Euthyphro and Socrates seem to fall to on that is that there are then things that are either like neither or both in terms of the piety impiety binary, but the issue that Socrates takes like through questioning with Euthyphro is that Euthyphro seems convinced that while he admits there are certain things that are ambiguously pious or impious, he somehow knows that what he is doing is definitely pious.
Correct. Now, Socrates is trying to pull Euthyphro out of that certainty and conviction of what he is doing is pious to reflection of what piety is, and see maybe if you question that concept, then you will see what you are doing differently. And this is really the philosophical attitude in terms of questioning what you are doing in terms of its concept. Believing that what you are doing is pious presupposes that you always already answered what piety means. And that's the force of philosophy, something that I constantly repeat, and you need to question that and somehow think it for yourself. Namely, whenever someone gives a particular example, they are necessarily, inevitably operating with a definition of what that concept is. So we are already philosophical in the sense that we answer the conceptual question, but we are not reflective enough to see that concept explicitly. And therefore, whenever people say like, oh, I don't pay attention to philosophical questions, cool, that's your life. You can do whatever you want, except it's wrong, because you do operate with certain answers and conceptual responses to those questions. You do certain things and you don't do certain things. You decide like, not maybe explicitly, but like, I'm not going to steal, I'm not going to kill, I'm not going to do this, doing this is right, doing this is wrong. And then you say, well, but that is just my definition. It really doesn't work that way, because ultimately you are going to confront another person with that attitude, with that definition. Then what's going to happen? Like, if our conceptions clash, how do we get out of this other than violence and aggression? Yes.
I can see why they wanted to prosecute Socrates. He was just like I was just reading the whole thing, and it was like really funny to me how smug he was being when he was questioning Euthyphro, like the way that he was going about it.
Who is smart?
Socrates. I feel like he was smug.
Why?
No, like the one thing that comes to mind is like when he was like, the concept that I'm describing to you is not that difficult to grasp. Like pull yourself together, and like he kept like pushing Euthyphro to like try and answer his questions. Although like so that Euthyphro can see that like he doesn't have an answer and a definite like definition of piety. I just felt like it was pretty. I don't know. It was. I just found it like really funny, and I thought it was like quite smart the way he went about it.
Okay. I don't know how you think about that confrontation. I mean, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, imagine a press conference, somebody is in the position of authority, he's saying something, and then somebody asks a question, and then there's this awkward moment, like, you want that to be over. Or is it just me because I belong to a screwed up generation?
I think it's the same for me. Like when like someone questions authority in a way that like when the authority figure cannot answer the question, and like when the question is like I can't say if the question is like unanswerable or whatever, but then like when it's not a question that people normally ask or that people are expected to ask, and then it becomes like uncomfortable because it's like it looks as if you're undermining the person that's in authority.
So do we unconsciously identify with the authority, with the power? Do we imagine ourselves in the position of power? I mean, go ahead, sorry.
I think so. I think it's like we imagine ourselves in the same position. If we were being asked that question, like we wouldn't really have an answer to difficult questions that like they get asked. So then it's like it then becomes really like that's why like you feel the secondhand embarrassment because you're like, oh, I wouldn't know what to say in the situation or something like that. That's why I feel like unconsciously we do relate to the authority figure.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and I want to just continue with this. The discourse, that you are hearing or you are participating, always tends to put you in the position of power, always identifies with the power. I mean, not for everybody, not under all circumstances, of course, but in general, like as a democratic citizenship, you are always sort of given this delusion that you are exercising power. And since you're exercising power, you imagine yourself at the center of the power and you are defending that. And maybe in politics, this is not happening, but even at the moment of voting, like there's this beautiful delusion, like when you vote, you have to do it with the confidence that it is actually doing something, that you are participating, you are responsible for the situation. That is always democratic discourse somehow putting you imaginatively at the center of the power. That's why we love it. Unconsciously, we love it. We love people who exercise power. Now, we don't agree with the way they exercise that power, maybe, but we love the exercise of power and imagine ourselves maybe exercising power against them. And again, we are sort of fetishizing that position of power. Yes, Jack, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that was a very, very interesting point. It's kind of more like a vicious cycle where when people try to challenge or talk, speak up against people in positions of power, we put ourselves into that position, you know, and it's kind of just keeps going like round and round and round. And by being in a position of power, I feel like we have the tendency to, it reinforces whatever we believe in, our personal beliefs. We think that we are right because of that. Similar to like what I think Socrates said on like page 5, when he was like, whereas by Zeus, Euthyphro, you think that your knowledge of the divine and piety is so accurate that you have no fear of having acted impiously in bringing your father to trial. Which I kind of feel like summarizes many of the leaders in the world right now, not just leaders, even like on a different level, like us as students. Sometimes when we put in a position of power, we believe that what we think is right, until someone else who gets into a position of power and kind of undermines what we are saying.
That's a very good observation. That's why I always philosophically wonder about this power of leadership conferences and discourse on leadership. Like, you have to be a leader, which you need to sort of prepare yourself to believe that you are always right. But a good leader can also sometimes entertain the possibility of not being right, and other people you are actually ruling can be right, but you should also be able to listen to them and then still be right by taking advantage of those people. So it's always this kind of fetishization of power, authority, that is built in this discourse. And to me, Socrates is really questioning that very gesture. Therefore, like, being smug, maybe that might be, I mean, I go back to that observation, it might come across as being smug, but even if you are in opposition, even when you are, because sometimes certain people imagine themselves at the position of power more than other people. That's for sure. This is the historical sort of situation in every country with different ways. Like, you know, if you are ethnically Turk in Turkey, you are going to imagine yourself more at the position of power. And if you are Kurdish, you are not going to imagine yourself in the same way. But whether you are in opposition or not, what you are aiming at is to gain that power, to exercise that power. So every oppositional structure in politics that we articulate is also like, so you had too much power, give me some power. This is really what we are fighting about. Like, you have too much authority, I'm going to exercise that power now. You know, whatever. I mean, I'm not giving you any examples, but like, you can imagine every situation like, this is more powerful. So I don't have a critique of power, I just have the critique of who exercises that power. I don't have a problem with the authority. I want that authority. I want to restructure the society in such a way that I exercise that authority. And when I exercise that authority, I exercise from the center too. And this is the paradox that Socrates and philosophy in general addresses, because that would be something like, by being in opposition to each other, serving the same structure. So Euthyphro believes that he is right. Now, if Socrates says to him, no, that is not the definition of piety, but this is the definition of piety, Socrates is repeating the same gesture of Euthyphro. It's just he wants to be the one who defines and exercises. Now, this is the political aspect. But maybe more importantly, in terms of how we understand ourselves exercising power over ourselves. When we are questioned, when somebody poses us a question or, you know, questions our actions or opinions, etc., we don't want to be. We want to be right. And how do we do that? By delimiting a kind of authority around us and say, this is my opinion. I have absolute right and power over myself. This is mine. Now, of course, we don't live like that unless we live in a commune and kill each other in that commune. But if we live just alone, if we were just to live alone, you wouldn't even have that power. You wouldn't even necessarily delimit that situation because you are not trying to protect yourself against others, right? You're always trying to protect your exercise of power over yourself, over others. So this is the notion of authority, having a authority over yourself. My opinion is my opinion. I have the right to exercise my opinion. This is the same fetishization of power. Now it is understood from the perspective of the individual. And this is what Socrates is, if anything, Pierre Hadot's understanding of Socrates. This is the self-relation that is put into question. That is not what Socrates is doing. Socrates is questioning himself. Know thyself is fundamentally not believing that you have the right to have certain opinions over yourself. And that's a way of life. That is different than just being a politician or a philosopher king or like sort of a philosophy teacher or a professor, but a way of being, a way of life. Because just imagine, when somebody asks you a question about something you do, you feel uncomfortable. You'll feel like, I don't feel like justifying it. Like, this is it. Okay, I stop here because there are questions. Thank you. Olivia, Charlie, Kate, do you have your hand too? Or is that the way you hold your hand? Okay, Olivia, go ahead.
So this is like something I noticed in relation to, this was something that Hadot talked about, the sort of like Socrates is sort of reducing himself and sort of demeaning himself and feigning like more ignorance than he probably feels that he himself has. Like I found that really interesting, the way that he was like, oh, I need to be your student and I need to receive your wisdom because you need to help me with this trial and things. And like, I think it's like, if Socrates had just gone up to Euthyphro and been like, I actually know the real definition of piety and you don't, not only would he be failing to critique sort of the power inherent in declaring that you know what piety is, but he would also sort of be failing to probably engage with Euthyphro, because questioning someone in that way, like that bluntly, or just asserting that you know what's right, generally shuts down a discussion. But I feel like by putting himself in like the completely ignorant pupil's position, he sort of first gives a responsibility to Euthyphro to exercise power and to know what's right, and then demonstrates through his questioning that Euthyphro doesn't have any idea what he's talking about.
I think that's a good point. And also the dramatic structure of the dialogue sort of attests to that. Like he's not the one who goes up to Euthyphro and asks the question. Euthyphro is like, what are you doing here? I can't imagine you having any business in court. And Socrates is not the one who is posing the question. The interesting part is like, we always see the question as an attack. It's an attack. Now, you also perhaps unconsciously see someone questioning him or herself as an attack onto oneself. And then we have this psychological kind of dogma of like, oh, you need to have confidence in yourself. You have to be sort of self-confident. It's like, what kind of like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm confident if I feel confident, if I'm not, I don't. Like, you cannot have like a general attitude of confidence about every stupid thing that I do. But that builds that kind of authority figure that you, when you question yourself, maybe unconsciously you feel like you are attacking yourself, given that you are looking for stability, persistency, consistency, being sort of chill and like comfortable with your being, etc. Which we don't want that. We don't authority to be like that if we don't have it. We don't have power to be exercised over us like that. So what we do is we do it. We do it to ourselves. And we make ourselves these dogmatic creatures, like I have my, like having strong opinions is a virtue. It's like, why is that? Why is that having strong opinions, being confident, assertive? Like this is that like one of the most toxic masculine so-called values, like being assertive. Like, why is that even a value? Why is that even a good thing? Like assert something if you believe that it's true, sure, but being assertive in general is like you love the exercise of that power, nothing else. And that's what Socrates is saying, that that is not a good way of living for any human being anyway. So he is not also like recommending this to everybody. He's just exercising it because he is being attacked. And instead of attacking himself in return and being aggressive against other people, etc., he's like, okay, let's go with it. Like, you're the one who are trying to kill me. Now, of course, this is a kind of idealized figure. Like, I don't know anybody could actually do this because, you know, you'll probably like, I'm right. I'm not inventing new gods and I'm not corrupting the youth. Just leave me alone. You'll probably scream like I would. So, but this is like the idealized notion, not it is an example, but it's characterization of a way of life. And what we learn from Socrates is that know thyself is actually the dictum that he gets is this question yourself. And a lot of contemporary philosophers like, you know, Fanon and Du Bois in another sense discovered this, like being a question, living as a question in which you don't even have this authority over yourself. And then how do you relate? And then you look into yourself and say, how do I feel when I questioned? Like, do you love it? Can you love it? Like people attacking you. It's like, please, that's awesome. Because that doesn't allow me to be this smug and confident person who loves power. Okay, Charlie, sorry, go ahead.
I don't really think my question, or not question, but more so comment is as applicable anymore the more I'm thinking about it. So,
Well, say it anyway.
all right. Is kind of, doesn't society kind of rely on people not knowing themselves and externalizing things that they aren't sure of? And what, like, I'm kind of confused, like, so people who, yeah, the idea of being confident and like having confidence and assertiveness seems to run directly contrary to the nature of externalization of thought. Because if you were fully sure of something, you wouldn't be putting it out there.
That's actually a good point. I think that that's actually relevant. But I think that it supports this idea of the paradoxical aspect of assertiveness, because assertiveness actually shows that you are not powerful. You are just trying to gain that power. And that's also like fits with our understanding of opposition. Like, you know, people who, I mean, you know, we asked the question, like people who are voiceless in society, should they have voice? Of course they should have voice, because voice gives you power. But by trying to give voice to the voiceless, you are actually playing this paradox of like, they should love power too. And sure, politically, fine, that should be good. But what is your relationship to yourself? Like, maybe ultimate wisdom is that if you are actually sure of yourself, you will never say it. You will never verbalize it. And maybe Socrates is like that. Yes, Kate, sorry.
Why do you assume that asserting something is a grab for power?
Why do I assume? Good question.
Because
Well,
I think that in some ways, like by asserting opinion or like one's own existence, like that can be a way to like hand over power.
Oh, that's Foucault. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mhm.
But that's I'm not really sure that we are true to that insight in society when we express our opinions politically. So
Mhm.
you are right. I made the assumption that certain assertiveness is bringing about that change that you are, or that configuration of power that you are articulating. So
Mhm.
it might not be. You are absolutely right. It might be exactly the opposite, actually. It might be giving up power
Mhm.
by revealing our deep thoughts and, like, yes. So therefore, I always thought like um, psychiatry and psychology and psychotherapy are the ones that we are actually like undermining ourselves and revealing ourselves to the power structures. But that's a different discussion. Very beautiful question. I think that's, we should not make that assumption.
Mhm.
But
And then I have a
politically, it appears to be. Yeah, go ahead.
Mhm. I have a follow-up that kind of ties in with that, though it's not fully related. It kind of returns back to things that you were saying earlier. You seem to use power and authority like interchangeably, as
Right.
if they were the same thing. Do you think that they are the same thing? I mean, I just take the opinion that they're two vastly different things, but which is why I was confused by your using them
Well,
interchangeably.
in this context, in the context of political power, yes. I'm not sure they are vastly different, but they are certainly different in the sense of exercise of power is a much more complicated process than. So I was using it in a sort of pre-critical, pre-Foucauldian. Foucault is a philosopher of like who wrote a lot about power and is an important figure to change our understanding of power. But maybe, okay, so let me put it this way. A pre-Foucauldian, a pre-critical understanding of power is much more in line with authority, whereas Foucauldian isn't. But again, philosophical exercise speaks maybe a different kind of power that you have over yourself. And that's the power of question in a way that it is not authority. It is not sort of restricting, restricting your freedom, or, that's how we see power. And I was really being very naive, as you noticed, in terms of the use of power as power, people exercise power over each other. And also like public discourse, like, more power to these people, more power to those people. That's the kind of political framework that we are operating nowadays. And also less power to other people because they have too much power. And that is more in line with authority. But if you want to talk about the concept of power in general, you are absolutely right. You need to be much more careful in not confusing them. Good point. I like it. Yes, Jack.
Yeah, no, it's kind of over now because, but yeah, basically, I was just saying I don't think being assertive gives us power necessarily. I feel like it puts us into a position of power where we feel like we're more inclined and we're more agreeable. Like what we say. I don't know how to really put this in words. I've been thinking it for like maybe the past 2 minutes. That's it. But I feel like when we are being assertive, we put ourselves into a position where it's harder for us to accept other opinions.
Sure, that's the problem. But that's what we are encouraged to do in general in society.
What to be
Encouraged of, okay, discursively. Now, you can also say we are actually discouraged to be assertive so that people can rule us. And in fact, modern society is actually silencing individuals. You can make that argument too. But the value under that evaluation is being assertive and exercising power is how things are going to change, how this power structure is going to change. So that's why you are also right, a sort of ambiguous situation here. But like, I don't know, like you tell me, like, aren't they sort of encouraging you to be leaders and be assertive and confident? Like, am I mistaken? Maybe millennials don't have that anymore, or maybe you are not even millennials anymore. But like that discourse was very prevalent. Like be more assertive, have self-confidence, say what you think, assert it. It's your opinion. You have the right, and all that. So maybe I'm misreading the situation. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think that discourse is true, but it comes with like the qualification that like to be that leader and to assert your own opinion, you have to have the right opinion. Like you have to fit the narrative of those that came before you and what they've projected will follow. Like putting in like a personal example, like I come from like a small town and like the joke is that I'm going to come back and I'm going to be the mayor. But then like the moment like I start like, you know, I mentioned like anything that deals with like feminism, then I'm like completely like exiled from the conversation. Like so long as I go along with what has been planned for me or like the narrative that they want to continue the town and I like kind of yell that from the rooftops, like that's when I can follow that leadership position. But if I stand in any opposition to any part of that, that I'm cut from it.
So did
So
you explicitly get the advice, Kate, forget about feminism, never talk about it ever again, go be a mayor in your town?
yes,
By whom?
by like my county council, because I did like a lot of work with local politicians and I've been like explicitly like I've had mentors who have been like, I know this may be important to you, but like if you want the position, you have to like cut out the opinions that are important to you.
So whether you decide to do it or not, do you think
Oh
that,
God, I'll never do it.
no, whatever. I mean, I'm not, I'm not saying like, do you think that there might be something problematic about that?
Oh yeah, I think it's heavily problematic. I mean, but I think that's because I mean, I think it depends on what you care about. I mean, do you care about being in a position of power or do you care about being like a right individual?
But now you are using this power in the exactly the same way that I was using, namely, it is both power if you decide to cut the feminism discourse and talk and become a mayor there. That's an exercise of
Mhm.
power. But it is also an exercise of power if you decide not to cut that discourse and empower yourself to speak about that.
See, I don't agree with that. I think the first is the definition of power because at least my own like kind of idea of power is that power is something that is rooted in coercion or manipulation. And the idea that you are inciting change either by like following or creating a certain narrative that pushes people to reach certain estimations, but acting as like an authority figure, which is something where I see like you're making change by working on the basis of like I don't know, morals, argumentation being right. So like by choosing
Oh.
to not fill that role and maybe like try to kind of like spread an ideology, not from a position of power, but purely from the merit of trying to convince people that it's right. I am acting as an authority figure, not as a figure of power.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we need to sort this out like separately in another
Okay.
context because that coercion, etc., is how I was using the term authority, because you
Mhm.
can you are authorized and you are sort of imposing that upon other people because you are the authority, like religious authority and political authority. So that's how I was using it. But also, I was under the impression that you were grilling me or asking me a question in terms of power of not being coercive and you know oppressing people, but a more productive understanding of power.
I just don't think that like productive understanding of power exists. I think it's something entirely of its own vein. I think that all power, I mean, I was kind of grilling you, but I don't think I had a specific intention. I came in with the opinion thinking like all power is inherently, I don't want to say evil, but forceful to some degree.
Okay, so then we need to read Foucault. Then
Yeah.
we need to read Foucault in another class because that you I would recommend all of you to do it actually. Like Discipline, Punish, 1975.
Yep.
I mean that conception of power is very different. But okay, then we are in agreement. There is no problem. Yes, I think that we all, to a certain extent, in our opposition, as well as in our understanding of the political authority, we love and fetishize power.
Mhm.
Even those of us who hate power, so to speak, actually love power. Yes, Olivia, sorry.
Sorry, Fareed and Kate, are you both saying that the position that Kate is asserting is close to the position presented by Foucault, or is Foucault like the antithesis to what Kate's saying?
Now I understand that it is antithesis to
It's
what.
the antithesis. Okay.
Yeah, Foucault has a more productive and different understanding of power than mere coercion.
I find it interesting that you think that's more productive, but okay.
What's more productive?
You said Foucault was more productive, or his idea of power was more productive.
No, he has a productive understanding of power. He thinks power is productive. I don't. Think
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like his was better. Which
No,
I'm not. I'm not trying to say that like I'm more
wasn't-
advanced than Michel Foucault, but
I wasn't saying that your conception was unproductive and productive. Foucault's conception of power is power as productive. He thinks that it is more sort of generating rather than coercing and undermining, because that's exactly like, why is there like a power exercise in psychiatry, for example, because it's actually making us better, heals us, but exercises power over us and sort of connects us to the system in ways that are more insidious than actual sort of coercive power.
yeah, everything is a prison.
The what?
I said, oh, I was making a joke. Everything is a prison.
As a present?
A prison.
Okay. Like,
Foucault. Yeah.
okay, anyway, let's
Never mind.
let's
Never
not
mind.
get into that very much. So here the issue for Socrates. He sees Euthyphro exercising power as a citizen in his own city-state, prosecuting his own father with the confidence and knowledge that he knows what piety means. So when Socrates is questioning him, he is questioning that power. Now, you can question that power by saying like, no, this is pious, not that is pious, which Socrates is not doing. But he is also not, but he is questioning because Euthyphro takes this position. Socrates doesn't take this position. Now you might say, and this is like whenever you criticize somebody, you should be very careful. Then you'll say, I mean, I've been told this a lot, like, so, well, you seem to be criticizing this. So what should we do? Like, what is your position? What is your proposal? It is easy to criticize something, but what would you replace it with? That is probably the most insidious questions, because imagine yourself being the king. What would you do? I don't have to answer that question. I don't have to replace your power with my power in order to criticize your power. I think that attitude is wrong. Now, I live in a society and that attitude sort of shape my life, sure, but I don't have to do it with my own life. I don't want to imprison myself into certain opinions and somehow torture myself with those opinions. Like, people do that to themselves. You have these incredible, strong opinions about how life should be, how you should be doing, how you should not be doing this, etc. And that really creates an enormous pressure on how you are going to live. And this is amazing to me because, well, every generation has it, but yours seems to be much more structured than perhaps our generation. So that's why I started with the discussion of this generational relationship, because the more knowledge you produce, the more information you produce, so to speak, then you form stronger and stronger opinions about how you should live, how you should be, and constantly failing to those standards and being like incredibly frustrated about that. And I'm not saying that you are putting that pressure onto yourself. That is, seems to be the social practice. So like, you know, when I was raising my children, there was like a book, How to Raise Your Children. That idea sort of like made me crazy. Like, people have been raising their children for centuries. The assumption is that they were all doing this wrong. Now you need to read a book about how to raise your child because there's a right way of doing it. And then if you are not doing it, you are feeling this pressure of like, oh, I'm screwing up. I'm like damaging my children for life. And I'm such a terrible father. Like I should read more books. I should learn more about things, etc. And that's really how more and more people live their lives. Like, yeah, I mean, my daughter, like she's like 16 and she's like at home and like Corona and like pandemic, etc. And she's like, I should be doing something about college. I'm not doing something about college. I feel so anxious about that. There's the right things to do about college. And then, okay, so I can't record this because she'll kill me. This, I believe, like, how do you live is not just a personal question, like my opinions, etc., but how to relate to the world, how to take the opinions and the political inclinations of the external world and how to negotiate that. And that's what he considers to be like spiritual exercise, how to live. Not just because like, if you ask this question, like, give me 5 principles according to which I can live. That's, if those principles are like strong opinions that shape your life, it actually has exactly the opposite impact of what you wanted, right? Because they become now other ways in which you fail to live. You fail those 5 standards. And this is like constantly what they are doing to you. And I really feel bad, but I can't do anything. Like, what are your goals? What is your 5-year plan? And like, well, I think that really depends for Socrates how you understand truth. If you understand truth as the proposition, like what is something that I can say X is Y and it is true. Or truth in the sense of genuine, like what would be a true life? True life, not a correct life. Genuine life. What does it mean to genuinely live as opposed to correctly live, namely accepting 500 propositions and live your life accordingly? So in that first correct sense, no, I don't think so, because he believes we live in a world of becoming and things that change. And no, and that sort of imprison you into one way of living. So, and it develops into dogmatism, and dogmatism that you exercise on yourself too, etc. But living with that question is a genuine life. That's the true life, yes. So truth is that coming into being of your genuine life, who you really are, because we have so many opinions, so many pressures, so many convictions, we don't even know who the hell we are. Like you don't even know which one of it is like your true being. So in that sense, that's the only way to be true, actually, for Socrates. But if you are looking like, what is the ultimate dogma? Like, there is a meaning in life and the meaning is love. Like, well, love of wisdom, sure. But like, no, there's no such thing. Okay, I need a break and then we'll have a little time. So let's just take like 5 minutes and then come back, okay? Somehow our wisdom nowadays is defined in terms of meaningful sentences posted somewhere. This is how we kind of understand the notion of wisdom. Like, tell me something profound. Tell me something like manageable and profound, simple, and a principle that I can maybe live by, or just like make it into a slogan, make it into a brand. That's what we are thinking nowadays. Like, what is your brand? What are your like principles of practices? How many principles of practices do we have? Like 4, that's enough. What are those words? Like integrity. Oh, that sounds good. Integrity. I'll take that a little, except, peace and justice. Yeah, those are cool too. So this is kind of the way in which we are operating rather than engaging with the thought. Like, give me the sort of pill version of that rather than engage me with the discussion. So wisdom in that sense, to going back to Isaac's question, answers usually are those pills. Like it gives you an answer. Like I feel insecure, I feel unstable, I feel not sure about my life. Give me something that will calm me down, give me orientation, organize my life, give me some principles. And that is the kind of anti-philosophical attitude for Socrates. That's precisely what he's not doing. That's something, even saying like, if I were to say like, question everything, that's still stupid. That's still kind of making into a slogan, an attitude that is much more complicated than just simply like, oh, I questioned that and I questioned that. I mean, of course, nobody questions everything and you shouldn't. Like, you know, yes, there is a light in front of me. I mean, it's not like a particularly philosophical attitude to question that. But if somebody says, you know, you should live like this, then you should question that, definitely. And if somebody is making you feel bad about like what you are doing, or, you know, you are constantly like failing to do the good things in life, and that's why you are feeling like, oh, I'm a failure, blah, blah. These are all kind of toxic slogans. Now, before all this kind of tangent, we were talking about how philosophy, Western philosophy, Greek philosophy, in a sense, is conceptually responsible to the theological movement towards monotheism from the ancient Greece to Christianity. Namely, too many gods confuse us. They don't give us what we want from God. They, you know, fight or disagree with each other. That's not good for us anymore. That we can't deal with that. There is a certain ambiguity with the divine authority that the Greeks enjoyed that they can't any longer enjoy. Like we want Zeus to say the last thing, Zeus is the king or the god of all gods. We don't want anything else. All the other gods sort of in Christianity become more like angels and saints, etc. But we need one ultimate authority, one. And that gives us that perspective that would orient our morality, our politics, our, well, not yet economy, but to a certain extent. So that organizes our lives. And we want that consistency. Yes, Charlie.
Aren't there technically like two ultimate authorities, like
Two what?
God, two ultimate authorities in God and like the devil or Satan, I guess you could say?
Well, that's sort of, I don't know. I mean, I don't know exactly the ins and outs of Christian anthropology and theodicy, etc. But I believe that God is infinite and ultimate authority, and Satan is like a way of explaining why within this perfect system so much stupid things are happening. So that still goes within the framework of monotheism. I think monotheism logically makes more sense that one God. And if you are Zoroastrian, for example, and you believe equally strong principle of good and evil, then you are stuck in this dualism of, again, instability. So for stability's sake, that, you know, we need that one consistent principle. But I'm not an expert on the position of Satan in Christianity. Yes, blessed.
I found like really interesting when Socrates was, when Euthyphro was like now trying to describe it as like sacrifice and like prayer, basically, like what the gods expect, like, and then Socrates was just like, so the way that like it works is that it's a trading system, and like I'd never like, it's something that I just like I never thought about before, and I was like, when you asked, he's like, so the god, what do the gods benefit from what our prayers and everything like that. So like me, like coming from the background that I do, I was just thinking like, yeah, like the whole concept of Christianity and everything like that. Yeah.
That's a great observation. I think that the first step that they take is like when Euthyphro says, what is pious is dear to all gods. He is in this small way paving the path for monotheism, because why do you need all gods if all gods agree with each other? Then you need only one God, because that undermines the possibility of disagreement and your principle being inconsistent. Now, the next stage is a different question that Socrates asked, and I believe that you can discern that from the dialogue itself, but if not, we can talk about it more explicitly. He says, is it dear to gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is dear to gods? There is a principle, a definition of piety, which gods find dear to them, as opposed to just merely gods finding something dear makes it pious. This is a very important distinction because the concept of piety here takes priority. Gods only find it pious, dear, because it is pious. So then the question of piety cannot be answered by, oh, it is dear to gods, because it doesn't make it pious. It is a property maybe of piety or justice, as he later puts it, but not the reason why it becomes pious. So one way of explaining this, perhaps a significant question why this is important, there are various religious principles. And all these religious principles can be defined under the heading of being dear to God, right? Now, we follow some of them and we don't follow the others. There is probably nobody on earth physically capable of following all the dear things to God. Moreover, we sometimes even think that certain things that appears to be dear to God should not be dear to God. So we, without even like revising and making reformations within the religion, etc., we, according to our own judgment, sort of saying, you know, like doing this is more important than not doing that. So not wearing buttons, not working on Saturdays is probably not that important. I mean, it is dear to God, but I'm not going to do those. But if he says, thou shalt not kill, well, I won't do that as much. I mean, I'll still do it, but I won't do it as much. So we have this capacity to somehow evaluate the precepts of every religion. And we do that really well with respect to other religions. I mean, think of it that way. I mean, it's very difficult to do it to your own religion. Perhaps you are brought up like that, etc. But then you find very problematic, questionable things in other religions, because you have that distance, you have the comfort, and you know, as a Christian, you might say, well, there are certain principles in Islam, like, there's no way I can accept that. And then as a Muslim, you say like, oh, in Judaism, there are certain things that are ridiculous, I'm not gonna follow that. That already somehow points out to a negotiation between human mind and understanding of piety and what should be the case, rather than what is the case. And when Socrates says, I don't care what God thinks, if it is pious, it should be dear to them. It doesn't make anything pious and just because gods love it, because what if God's love things that we find unfair? And they do. Usually other people's gods do, but still, even our God, maybe, I mean, God as defined in our religion, maybe that God finds or thinks something problematic too. And human beings change. And what we consider to be acceptable religious behavior is definitely not what is acceptable religious behavior now. How do we explain this change? that already speaks to the necessity of thinking about the concept of what pious religious should be rather than what is. Now, one of the ways in which that manifested itself is this turn towards monotheism, because we thought, people did, well, I don't really need two gods. That complicates things. And consistent, I mean, it's not consistent. Like, if they are equally powerful, what's going to happen? We are going to, like, whoever wins decides what justice is. That doesn't make sense. And it confuses us and creates factions within society. Some people go with this God, some people go with that God. Therefore, that doesn't bring about peace either. So this is all happening in this dialogue, this reference to the old myths about your relationship to your father, your relationship to authority, your relationship to God. And then the recognition, like, if I'm doing something just because it is religious and dear to God, then isn't this just a transaction? As Blessed very well pointed out, isn't this just like a give and take? Isn't this selfishness, which extends even beyond this world? I want to be good, not just in this world, but for eternity. Like, I want to have this wonderful life for eternity. And for that, if I don't have to kill people, fine, I won't. I mean, it's a small price to pay for eternity. Like, okay, I mean, you know, but you see that there's something problematic about that way of thinking, because the only reason that you are not killing is not because it is wrong, but because you are going to be punished. So that is like a eternal police force type of thing, like, you know, a kind of punishment in the afterworld. So that Socrates sees as, that doesn't undermine religion, that doesn't undermine, but it undermines a certain way of understanding religion. Now, of course, other things take that position too. Society, politics, science. You know, I read a really great headline today. Australia solved the problem of COVID by putting their faith in science, which was like this wonderful headline. I know they are doing it on purpose to like sort of blur the distinction between science and religion, etc. But well, maybe they were also politically coerced to do that as well. Not just like, if you ask every Australian, it's like they believe in science, they may believed in religion, but that was like an attitude. So yeah, other things take that position. And, you know, again, in contemporary society, we need to engage with the authority of everything, including authoritative discourses that we all accept as true.
Can you define what you mean by an authoritative discourse? Like,
Science.
okay. Do you have any other like non-science related discourses that you could like?
Well, I think science has the most potential for me to be that discourse. The others I don't even seriously consider, but maybe I'm wrong. Politically, I mean, religion is definitely within this, tradition is definitely within this, patriarchy is definitely within this, all other discourses that are already problematic. I think science has the potential of being perhaps the most legitimately occupying that position today. And it does. I mean, 99% of what we do in life is already determined by scientific activity.
Gotcha.
Well, I'm using a computer. Yes, Isaac.
Just earlier you said that the Socratic way of thinking doesn't undermine religion. And I think that's not true. I think it does undermine religion in that, like, we're talking about religion as establishing or like kind of formalizing a principle that people will follow instead of coming to it from their own self-reflection, which seems like the complete opposite of what Socrates is doing.
Okay, the reason I said that, I know this might sound like a political answer, but it really isn't. If you read Hegel, this is absolutely true. It is true that it undermines a certain understanding of religion, but it also opens up a different kind of understanding of religion in terms of 19th century conception of faith, in which case religion is not, and even fundamentally religious people do not see religion as following certain rules, but a certain attitude towards life, a certain understanding of living with your faith, not just following certain principles. So yes, it undermines religion to the extent that he goes beyond how religion is understood at his time, but at the same time, he contributes to a different understanding of religion. Because it would be completely misleading to say, look, oh, you undermine all religion, as if it is something that can be undermined, because it clearly speaks to a kind of human attitude that you cannot really undermine. You might not call it religion, you can call it something else. And that's precisely what I was criticizing. Like, if you put your faith in a discourse like science, that's the manifestation of a religious attitude. So that's why I said what I said in terms of doesn't undermine it completely, even though you might say that historically he is actually undermining polytheism. And he is sort of making it more inward. Like, pay attention to, he is accused of inventing other gods, right? What is the god that he invents? Or how does Euthyphro explain that? I understand that they are accusing you of inventing new gods because you keep talking about
Receiving divine signs, was it?
yes, that daimon. He thinks that there is a voice in him that constantly tells him what not to do. And that daimon, a kind of spirit, he says that he has, which is really in the modern times what we would consider to be like conscience. Like, I don't care what other people say, I shouldn't do this. I don't care whether it's acceptable or not. Like, if somebody would say to you, here is the gun, kill this person, no legal consequences, no religious consequences, no any type of consequences, do it. Some of us might do it, but some of us might say, don't do it. That is like the voice of conscience that you somehow build, which may be sort of random and not very systematic, is a different understanding of religiosity. And he is, yes, making this external gods and external transaction with gods much more problematic, but he is also awakening a kind of inner understanding of the principle of conscience and religion. That's why in 20th century, I don't know how it is in the 21st century, but in the 21st century, it was a question of faith, not a question of truth. I believe it. I'm not claiming that it to be scientifically true. So that's why I said what I said. But, does that make sense, Isaac? Yeah. And also, I don't want to, I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't want anybody who has faith get the wrong impression that, that sort of like philosophy is the simple-minded rejection of faith. Because it's not. Not that I don't want to give the impression, but it's not. So. Absolutely.
So when you talk about religion being living with one's faith as opposed to following certain rules, like, if someone follows a religion, but there's a certain commandment or something in that religion that they don't agree with morally, is not obeying that command and instead going with your internal moral compass that sort of expression of religion that you're talking about, like, would that be sort of living with your own faith?
That would be that is a faith that is not devoid of your own reflection and understanding. Yeah. I mean, because whenever people do something, you ask them like, why are you doing this? And whenever they say, like, the Bible tells me this, or the Quran tells me this, etc., then your immediate question is like, how is it that that is telling you? Like, is that even like an acceptable way of justifying your behavior in the social realm, of course, in the political realm? So that would be a legitimate question. And then you are asking about their own interpretations of what that principle is, rather than what that principle is. And there are lots of, I mean, in every religion, in every Abrahamic religion especially, which is a quest, like religion of book, if there's a book, there's a lot of interpretations.